It's finally here. It's summertime. It's warm outside. It's the best time of year for running. But there are some pitfalls you can run into. So today, I'm going to give you my 5 best tips for getting the most out of summer for running. If you're just joining me on the channel, I'm Jesse Funk. This is a show I call Runner's High, where we talk about everything running. If you run, if you love to run, and you want to know more about running to enjoy it more, like it is in this summertime, or if you want to get faster, hit the subscribe button. Stick around for more videos every Tuesday and Thursday. Now, when we talk about running in the summer, the first thing that comes to mind is it's hot, right? It's hot outside. You're going to sweat a lot. It's going to be uncomfortable for a little while. So my tip number 1 is run by feel. Do not be a slave to your watch. Don't think, hey, I have to go this pace because this is the pace that I go. No, you really need to pay attention to your body and your rate of perceived exertion when we increase heat, when we change temperatures, and you have to acclimate to that new temperature when it gets hotter outside. So I've talked about this before. Rate of perceived exertion is exactly what it sounds like. How hard does it feel like you're going? If you normally run 8-minute pace and it feels like you're running 8-minute pace and you look at your watch and it says 9-minute pace, forget about it. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. That's what your body can handle in this heat. There's kind of a nice rule of thumb, something along the lines of every degree over 60 degrees is going to be 1 second lost per mile. Now, the hotter and hotter you get, I actually feel like it's more like an exponential curve because if we go from 60 to 100, strictly speaking, it should only be like 40 seconds per mile. But just there's a point where your sweat can't keep up, your body overheats. It's just going to be terrible. So use that as a rule of thumb. Know that as it gets hotter, you're going to slow down. So run by feel. Tip number 2, and you probably felt this one coming, is hydrate. It's so important because you're going to be sweating so much more to keep yourself cool. It's important to hydrate with some kind of electrolytes in the heat. Now, the thing to know about electrolytes is that typically for workouts under half hour, you don't necessarily need to take them in. But if you go over a half hour, then it's generally considered a good idea to start supplementing with electrolytes. Now, electrolytes are just salts, various kinds of salts that exist in your body that you sweat out. And it's important to know that the amount of electrolytes that you sweat out varies by person. And on top of that, in the heat, when you're acclimating to the heat, that amount of electrolytes can jump 30 to 50% as you're acclimating. Now, it usually goes back down to your baseline, and it is hard to know just off the bat what it is without doing a test. That's why, consequently, we are developing a series of sports drinks to help match to your particular sweat levels, your particular electrolyte levels, and we'll be doing testing later on this year. We'll have the equipment available that you can do at-home tests, send stuff into us. We'll get the lab results back to you and match you up with a sports drink. So check that out later on in the year. Not in the summer, it'll be in the fall at sulpre.com/shop. And you can figure out exactly what your electrolyte levels are and the replacement you need. But when we're talking about hydrating, electrolytes help you hold on to water. There's an issue if you're just taking water in, so that can actually mess with the balance of electrolytes in your body, and then you don't retain the water and you need more salt. So that's the whole point of electrolytes, is you're trying to maintain the same kind of balance in your body that already exists. So hydrating is important because it's hot, you're going to sweat more, and it's important to take electrolytes in if you're going over a half hour, or it's especially hot and you know you're going to sweat a lot, to help retain that water later on so you are hydrated for the rest of the day and continue to function on your run and for the rest of your life. And I don't mean that in the vague sense. I mean all the other things you got to do today after you get done with your run. When you are dehydrated, you're going to feel more lethargic, you're going to have brain fog, those kind of things. So that's why it's so important, not just for your run, but just for your everyday quality of life, to make sure you're hydrated. Tip number 3, don't run in the heat of the day. I can't tell you how many people it pains me to watch do this in the summertime. Or so, if you don't know, I live in Kansas City. I live near a set of trails where people run all the time, so I see people run fairly frequently near my house. Now, I see people out at 2, 3 in the afternoon when it's absolutely the blistering hot part of the day. It's humid here in the Midwest, so those things combined makes it even hotter because your sweat doesn't evaporate. When your sweat doesn't evaporate, it's harder to cool your internal temperature down. It's the point of sweating. Try to get heat out of your body. So when you're running in the hot of the day, not only are you going to fatigue easier, but you can potentially end up with illnesses like heat stroke because you're raising your internal temperature so high. So there is one small exception to this rule, and I've done this before myself, but you have to be very, very careful. Now, before I tell you this rule, I want you to think of yourself and be honest whether this applies to you, and not just think, hey, I'm some, macho cool guy, and I'm going to go do this and just be a badass. That's not the point. The exception is if you're getting ready to race and you know that your race is going to be very hot. You want to be prepared for that race. Now, I did this several years back when the USA Triathlon National Championship was in Omaha, and we were anticipating temperatures were going to be very hot for the race. Now, it's a race the last couple hours, so that was something to acclimate to as well. So what I did was run in the very hot part of the day, but I didn't do it every single day. It was my runs in particular that I did it because that's the last part of a triathlon. And I kept, pool to cool temperatures, biking to as cool temperatures as I could, and use that run, the shorter runs that I had, the long runs, not my speed work, to acclimate to the hotter part of the day. And I was so much more prepared for that race than many people who were wilting because I spent that time. Again, you got to be careful about how much time you're going to spend if that's the case. Now, if you don't have a race that's going to be hot, don't do it. It doesn't help that much. It is nice to be heat acclimated, but the benefits of training you're going to get from running in more optimal temperatures are going to far outweigh what that you need from that heat acclimation, unless it's a very specific situation you're going to encounter. Number 4, and this one's going to sound familiar, hydrate. I said it for number 2, but we're going to come back to it again as the number 4. And I'm not just bullshitting you. It's so important, but number 4 is a little bit different in that it's pre-hydrate. It isn't just drink after your run is over. It's drink before it ever starts. And that's the day before the run. If you run every day, then continue to drink water throughout the rest of the day. Don't get lax and say, oh, I didn't. Especially if you go out and drink, have alcohol, you're going to get dehydrated. You need to make sure you're taking in water. You're going to have a bad time, as they might say in a little show in Colorado. In any case, it is important to pre-hydrate if you're going to be out in the heat, especially, like I mentioned, if you're going to be using that hottest part of the time of the day to acclimate to the heat. Now, if you watch the Smart Athlete podcast, you don't have a ton of different guests on, but one of my guests is a friend of mine, Dr. Todd Buckingham, and one of the things he suggested to me, because I have such a hard time in the heat, because I sweat so much, I sweat more than average, is that when you pre-hydrate, you can actually preload electrolytes. This is not something you need to do all the time, but for an extreme situation or in this limited situation of I'm getting ready to acclimate to a high level of heat. Remember how I said in the beginning of the video that you can lose more electrolytes in your sweat when you're acclimating to the heat. You can preload 1,000 to 1,500 extra milligrams of electrolytes the day before an event, we'll call it, be it a singular training run or a race, and that can help you retain water and be more hydrated for that particular event. You don't want to do it all the time, but it is useful in this very limited scenario. So pre-hydrate, make sure you're hydrated all the time. It's not just a post-workout activity. And my 5th and final tip is something you might expect from somebody who started a company making skincare and body care products for athletes before we've, moved on to working on this new sports drink, is use sunscreen. Now, unfortunately, I don't have sunscreen to sell you because I haven't figured out how to make a better sunscreen than what's already out there. There's so many options. maybe eventually I'll have a sunscreen out there. Maybe by the time you watch this video, I'll have something. Solper.com/shop. You can check it out, see if we've got one. But in any case, using sunscreen is super important because getting a sunburn increases your chance of skin cancer. And getting more sunburns continues to increase the chances. And that's a bad time for anybody involved. You want to avoid the whole scenario, and even if you don't get skin cancer, it actually ages you more. So using sunscreen is important for the condition of your skin, both now and in the long term. Now, if you say to me, well, I don't care about my skin, I will say to you, do you understand what your skin does? It's your largest organ. It protects you from all the environment around you trying to get into your body. Your skin is very, very important. So use your sunscreen, please. If you can't think about yourself in the future and say, hey, I want to help the future me, think about you right now. You don't want to have a sunburn because it's uncomfortable. You don't sleep as well. If you don't sleep as well, you don't recover. Then you're not going to have a good time on your next run. It's harder to move when you're all crispy and burnt. Just the unpleasantness of right now hopefully is enough motivation to say, I'm going to wear my sunscreen when I go out to run. Especially if you're like me, it's hotter out, you don't wear a shirt. Ladies, wearing sports bras, or shirtless if you're in a town that does that. To each their own. In any case, before we get too digressed, it still is important to wear your sunscreen. I'll stop saying it, but those are my 5 tips. Do you have any other tips you want to share with everybody else? Leave them down in the comments below, the things that help you run the best in the summer. I'll see you next time on the next episode of Runner's High.